I learned 3 things in my first year serving the palace. First, never make eye contact with nobility. They don't see you anyway, and if they do, it's never for a good reason. Second, the Alpha King doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. When Riven Ashbourne speaks, even the stone walls seem to hold their breath. Third, invisibility is a kind of armor, and I wore mine like a second skin. For 2 years, I scrubbed marble floors that cost more than my village. I polished silver that would never touch my lips. I moved through gilded corridors like a ghost, present but unseen, necessary but forgettable. The perfect servant, the ideal Omega, small, quiet, and entirely unremarkable. That was the plan anyway. Until the day someone decided I was worth noticing. It started with a box. I almost missed it entirely. The morning had been chaos. 3 visiting delegations meant the entire staff was stretched thin, running between the guest wings and the main hall like ants rebuilding a collapsed hill. I'd been assigned to the eastern corridor, the one with the tall windows that caught the early light and showed every streak, every imperfection. My knees ached from kneeling on cold stone, my hands raw from lye soap. I was invisible. I was safe. Then Mira appeared. She was younger than me by a year, still jumpy around the senior staff, still flinching when nobles passed too close. She shouldn't have been in the eastern wing at all, her station was the kitchens. But there she was, breathless and wide-eyed, clutching something wrapped in plain brown paper. "Nyla," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder like she expected guards to materialize from the tapestries. "This came for you." I stared at her, then at the package. "For me?" "The courier said your name." "Your name." Her voice climbed half an octave. I didn't know servants could get deliveries. Neither did I. The box was small, no bigger than my palm, wrapped simply but with care. The paper was good quality, not noble grade, but deliberate. Someone had taken time with it. The string was tied in a neat bow, the kind you see in shop windows in the merchant quarter. There was a card. My hands shook as I turned it over. The handwriting was elegant, economical, just 1 line. "You didn't get that from me." No signature, no explanation, just those 6 words that somehow felt like both a warning and an invitation. "Well?" Mira bounced on her toes, curiosity warring with fear on her face. "What is it?" I should have thrown it away. Should have reported it to the head steward immediately. Unexplained gifts to palace staff weren't romantic, they were suspicious. They were the kind of thing that got you questioned, reassigned, or worse. But I didn't throw it away. I tucked it into my apron pocket, finished my corridor in record time, and waited until the evening bells rang before I let myself look. "Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm working toward growing Liana's SMoonShadowTale. And if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to the story. My quarters were barely large enough for a cot and a trunk, shared with 2 other maids who worked the night rotation. In the precious hour before they returned, I sat on the thin mattress and unwrapped the package with fingers that wouldn't quite steady. Inside, nestled in plain cloth, was a hairpin. Silver, I thought at first. Then the light shifted and I realized white gold. Delicate metalwork formed a crescent moon, small enough to be modest but crafted with a skill that spoke of expense. Real expense. The kind that didn't find its way into servant quarters by accident. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something dangerous bloom in my chest, something that felt almost like mattering. For just a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to wear it. To walk through those marble halls with something beautiful in my hair, something chosen. To be the kind of person someone thought about, worried about, sent gifts to. So I tried it on. Just once. Just to see. The silver was cool against my scalp as I tucked it into my braid. I had no mirror servants, didn't need them, but I could feel the weight of it, delicate and foreign. I felt different. Not invisible. Not armor. Seen. I wore it for maybe 3 minutes before panic set in. I yanked it free, wrapped it back in the cloth, and shoved it to the bottom of my trunk beneath my spare uniform and the prayer beads my mother had given me. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, Head steward Varric appeared in the laundry where I was folding linens, his expression carved from granite. Nyla Thorne? Every head in the room turned. I felt my stomach drop somewhere near my feet. Yes, sir? His Majesty requests your presence.
His Majesty
Immediately.
requests your presence.
The room went silent.
Immediately.
Someone dropped a pillowcase. In the corner, old Bessa made a warding sign against her chest. I had been invisible for 2 years. I had scrubbed floors in rooms where the king held war councils and never once met his eyes. I had served wine during state dinners and been as noticeable as the wallpaper. I had perfected the art of being present without existing. And suddenly, impossibly, the Alpha King knew my name. Varric didn't wait for questions. He turned on his heel, and I followed on legs that felt borrowed, through corridors that had always been familiar, but now seemed to stretch and twist like a labyrinth designed to swallow me whole. We didn't go to the throne room. We didn't go to any of the public chambers. We went to the king's private study. Varric knocked once, received a low acknowledgement I felt more than heard, and opened the door just wide enough for me to slip through. Then he left me there, alone, with the Alpha King. The room was smaller than I expected, lined with maps and books, lit by the last red rays of sunset through narrow windows. And there, with his back to me, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and hands braced on a table covered in what looked like border surveys, was Riven Ashbourne. He didn't turn around. The silence stretched. I counted my heartbeats 10, 20, 30, before he finally spoke. You didn't get that from me. His voice was quiet, controlled, exactly like they said it would be. And somehow, that made it so much worse, because the words weren't a question. They were an accusation. And I realized, with a cold clarity that stopped my breath, that the Alpha King already knew about the gift. He knew, and I was about to learn exactly what that meant. I had imagined this moment before every servant had. The sudden summons, the private audience, the mistake that costs you everything. But in my imagination, I'd always known what I'd done wrong. Now, standing in the king's private study with the scent of old leather and candle wax thick in the air, I had no idea what crime I was being accused of. Only that Riven Ashbourne knew something I desperately wished he didn't. Your Majesty, I... Don't. He still hadn't turned around. His hands remained flat on the table, fingers spread across a map that showed the Northern Territories. I asked you a question. Who gave you the gift? My mind raced. Denied it? Claimed ignorance? But he'd phrased it as a statement first. You didn't get that from me, which meant he already knew about the hairpin. Lying now would be worse than whatever truth I stumbled into. I don't know, Your Majesty. You don't know. He repeated the words like he was tasting them, testing their weight. Someone delivers a package to you, by name, inside my palace, and you don't ask questions? I swallowed hard. I thought perhaps it was a mistake. Was it? Finally he turned. I'd seen King Riven before. Of course. From a distance in throne rooms and banquet halls, surrounded by advisors and guards. But I'd never been looked at by him. Never had those dark eyes focus on me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve or a threat he was deciding how to eliminate. He was younger than the portraits made him seem late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. The kind of face that could be handsome if it ever softened. But right now it was all hard angles and barely contained control. An alpha in every sense that mattered, powerful, dangerous, and absolutely certain of his authority. The hairpin is in your quarters, he said. Not a question. Bottom of your trunk, beneath prayer beads. My blood turned to ice. You searched I search everything. He moved around the table with a predator's grace, each step deliberate. Every room, every servant, every visitor who passes through these walls. You think I've survived 6 years of rule by trusting that people are who they claim to be? He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Close enough that his scent, pine and steel and something darker made my Omega instincts scream at me to lower my gaze, to submit, to make myself small again. I didn't. I'm not a threat, Your Majesty. No, he agreed. You're something more dangerous. You're a message. I don't understand. You scrub floors. He began circling me slowly, and I forced myself not to track his movement. You're Omega, unremarkable, exactly the kind of person nobody notices, which makes you perfect. Perfect for what? For reaching me. He stopped in front of me again, and this time when he spoke, his voice dropped to something quieter, something that felt almost like confession. If someone can send you a gift inside these walls, if they can reach you without being caught, then they're telling me they can reach anyone. Even the servants I trust to pour my wine. Even the maids I allow in my private chambers. His eyes bored into mine. Even me. Understanding crashed over me like cold water. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't even really about me. I was a demonstration. A threat wrapped in pretty paper. What do you want me to do? I heard myself ask. Something flickered across his face, surprise. Maybe. As if he hadn't expected me to ask that question. You're going to wear it. Your Majesty? The hairpin. He returned to his table, dismissing me with his posture, even as he continued speaking. Tomorrow, during the council session, you'll serve, and you'll wear the hairpin where everyone can see it. But someone sent it to provoke a reaction, so we're going to give them one. He glanced back over his shoulder. We're going to let them think it worked. And you're going to watch who notices, who reacts, who gets nervous. You want me to be bait. I want you to be useful. The words should have been cruel, but somehow they weren't. They were simply honest. Can you do that? Every survival instinct I'd honed over 2 years screamed at me to refuse, to beg for reassignment, to disappear back into the safety of invisibility. But I thought about the hairpin, about the care someone had taken to find me, to send that message disguised as a gift, about how I'd felt, just for 3 minutes, like someone who mattered. Yes, Your Majesty. He nodded once. Then, as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me at the door. Nyla. I looked back. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Trust no one in that room tomorrow. Not the nobles. Not the advisors. A pause, weighted with something I couldn't name, especially not me. The door closed behind me, and I stood in the empty corridor with my heart hammering and a single thought burning through my mind. Why would a king warn me about himself? I didn't sleep. How could I? Tomorrow I would walk into a room full of nobles and politicians wearing a gift that might as well be a target painted on my forehead. I would serve wine to men who controlled armies while the Alpha King watched me like a hawk tracking a rabbit, waiting to see which predator made the first move. When dawn broke over the palace walls, I was already dressed, the silver hairpin wrapped in cloth and weighing down my pocket like a stone. The council chamber was in the western wing, a room I'd cleaned dozens of times but never entered while occupied. As servants, we came in before dawn, to lay fires, and after midnight to clear glasses, existing in the spaces between power rather than within it. Today was different. Head steward Varric met me outside the servants' entrance with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what game was being played and didn't approve of me as a playing piece. You'll serve the eastern side, he instructed, his voice clipped. Pour only when glasses are empty. Do not speak unless directly addressed. Do not make eye contact with. I know the rules, sir. His eyes narrowed. Do you? Because in my experience, servants who attract royal attention tend to forget them. Before I could respond, the bells chimed. 8 o'clock. The council would be gathering. The hairpin, Varric said quietly. His Majesty was explicit. You're to wear it visibly. My hands shook only slightly as I pulled it from my pocket and fixed it in my braid. The white gold caught the morning light streaming through the high windows, probably visible from across the room. Perfect. Varric studied me for a long moment, then sighed. Watch yourself in there, girl. You're swimming with sharks now. The council chamber was exactly as imposing as I'd imagined. A long table of dark wood dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs that had probably cost more than my family's entire farm. Maps covered the walls between oil paintings of previous kings, all of them watching with the same stern, calculating expressions their descendant now wore. King Riven sat at the head of the table, Commander Cadmar at his right hand, a wall of muscle and suspicion who tracked my entrance with eyes that missed nothing. To the king's left sat Lady Sarah Vale, the only Omega on the council, her silver hair pinned in an elaborate style that somehow made her look more formidable rather than fragile. The other seats filled quickly. Lord Corvindanes, jowled and jeweled, smiling like a snake who'd just spotted a mouse. Lord Tremaine, younger but equally polished. 3 military advisors whose names I didn't know. A woman in scholar's robes, who must have been the royal archivist, And at the far end, in the seat reserved for visiting dignitaries, sat someone I didn't recognize. An alpha. Clearly you could see it in the way he held himself, the unconscious authority in his posture. But where King Riven's power felt like a sheathed blade, this man's felt like an open hand. Firm, but somehow safe. Shall we begin? King Riven's voice cut through the murmured greetings. I moved to my station along the wall, wine pitcher ready, and tried to become invisible again. It didn't work. I felt Lord Corvin's eyes find me immediately, tracking the hairpin with an expression that flickered between recognition and calculation. Lady Sierra noticed too, her sharp gaze moving from the pin to the king and back again with an understanding that made my stomach clench. But it was the stranger at the far end who surprised me. When his eyes found the hairpin, they widened slightly, then moved to my face with something that looked almost like concern. Who was he? The matter at hand. King Riven continued, unfolding a document with deliberate care. Is the northern border dispute. Prince-elect Kale has traveled from the Frost territories to negotiate terms. Ah, so the stranger was the northern alpha. I studied him more carefully now, noting the simpler cut of his clothes, the absence of excessive jewelry. He dressed like someone who valued function over display. The terms are simple, Kale said, his accent carrying the crisp edges of mountain regions. Your king regent promised my grandfather mineral rights in exchange for military support during the succession war. We've upheld our end for 6 years. We're simply asking that you honor yours. The document you reference, Lord Corvin interrupted smoothly, is unsigned, a draft, not a treaty. My grandfather's word is not a contract. Corvin's smile never wavered. Surely in the Frost territories, you understand the difference? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. I moved along the wall, refilling glasses that were barely touched, watching the political dance unfold. King Riven said nothing. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. Perhaps, Lady Sarah interjected quietly, we might review the original documents before dismissing the claim entirely. The documents are quite clear, Corvin said, though I suppose we might waste the council's time on semantics if your majesty wishes. It was masterful, really. He'd positioned it so that pursuing the matter further would look weak, while dismissing it would make the king look honorable and decisive. A perfect trap. We'll take a recess, Riven said finally. Reconvene in 1 hour. Chairs scraped. Nobles rose. I pressed myself against the wall as they filed out, trying not to exist. That's when Prince-elect Kale passed close enough to speak, his voice pitched for my ears alone. That's a northern design. The hairpin. Where did you get it? I froze. Every instinct screamed not to answer, not to engage, not to answer him. King Riven's voice cut across the emptying room. He hadn't moved from his seat, but his eyes were locked on the two of us with an intensity that made the air feel thin. It was a gift, Your Highness. From Kale pressed, and now he looked genuinely concerned. This is important. That design, it's a specific maker. Only 3 people commission work from her, and I'm one of them. The room had gone completely silent. Commander Cade had stopped at the door. Lady Sarah had paused mid-step. Even Lord Corvin had turned back, his expression suddenly very interested. I don't know who sent it, I said honestly. There was no signature. But you kept it. This from the king, his voice dangerously soft, and wore it. You told me to. Before that, he stood now, moving around the table with that same predatory grace. You received an anonymous gift and you kept it. Why? Because for 3 minutes, I'd felt like someone who mattered. Because in 2 years of being invisible, someone had finally seen me. I couldn't say any of that. I don't know, Your Majesty. He stopped inches away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that everyone still in the room could see this wasn't just a king addressing a servant, this was something else entirely. You don't know, he repeated. You're either lying or dangerously naive. Which is it? My temper, the same one I'd spent 2 years suppressing, flickered to life. I'm neither, Your Majesty. I'm just someone who made the mistake of being noticeable. Something flashed in his eyes. Surprise again. And something darker. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Clear the room, he said quietly, never breaking eye contact. Now, Commander Cade hesitated. Your Majesty. Now. They left. All of them. Even Kale, though he cast one last concerned glance at me before the door closed. And then I was alone with the Alpha King for the second time in 2 days. This time, his composure cracked. Do you have any idea? He said, his voice still quiet but vibrating with something raw. What you've done? That hairpin isn't just from the north. It's from his commission, which means someone is trying to tie you to him, to make it look like the Frost Prince is conducting secret communications through an Omega servant. He stepped closer. Do you understand what that would do? What it would mean if Corvin could prove the North was conspiring against me. But they're not. It doesn't matter if they are. And there finally the control slipped. His voice rose, just slightly, just enough to show the fury underneath. What matters is the appearance. What matters is that someone saw you as the perfect piece to move across their board, and you let them. I didn't know. No, you didn't. He dragged a hand through his dark hair, and for just a moment he looked less like a king and more like a man carrying too much weight. That's exactly the problem. Silence fell between us, heavy and complicated. What happens now? I asked finally. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. Now we find out who thinks they can use you to hurt me, and we make sure they regret it. The promise in those words should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Safe. Protected. Claimed. The council reconvened exactly 1 hour later, and I was still there. This, apparently, had not been part of the original plan. Head Steward Varric had tried to recall me twice, sending junior servants with increasingly urgent messages that I was needed elsewhere, that another server would take my place, that my continued presence was irregular. King Riven had overruled him each time with a single word, "She stays." So I stayed. I stood against the eastern wall, pitcher in hand, hairpin glinting like a beacon, and watched the political machine grind back into motion. But something had changed during the recess. I could feel it in the way Lord Corvin watched me now, not with idle curiosity, but with focused calculation. In the way the other council members' eyes kept drifting to the hairpin, then to the king, then back again. Even Prince-elect Kale seemed tenser, his jaw tight as he retook his seat. Lady Sarah was the only one who looked unsurprised. She caught my eye once, briefly, and gave the tiniest shake of her head. A warning. Shall we continue? King Riven settled back into his chair with the ease of a man who knew he controlled the room. I believe we were discussing the Northern mineral rights claim. Actually, Your Majesty, Lord Corvin said smoothly. I wonder if we might address a more pressing security concern first. Here it comes, I thought. Security? Riven's tone was mild. Too mild. It's come to my attention that certain communications may have been conducted through irregular channels. Channels that could pose a risk to the crown. Corvin's eyes slid to me, then to Kale. Particularly communications with visiting dignitaries. The trap was sprung. That's a serious accusation, Lord Corvin. Lady Sarah's voice was cool. I assume you have evidence? I have concerns. Surely His Majesty would agree that even the appearance of impropriety should be investigated, especially when it involves... He gestured delicately in my direction. Household staff. Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt pinned, dissected, studied like an insect under glass. The girl is a servant, Commander Cade rumbled. Cleared by my office personally. She's been here 2 years with no incidents. Until now, Corvin countered. Until she begins wearing expensive northern jewelry on the same day a northern prince arrives to make territorial demands. It's a hairpin, Kale said sharply. Not a coded message. Is it? Corvin leaned forward. Then perhaps the girl can tell us where it came from. Who gave it to her? What was said when it was delivered? The room waited. I looked at King Riven. His expression was carved from stone, giving nothing away. But his fingers drummed once against the table, a signal. Maybe. Or a test. I don't know who sent it, I said clearly. I received it 2 days ago with a note that said only, "You didn't get that from me." No signature, no explanation. And you didn't report this mysterious gift to security? Corvin's smile was serpentine. How curious. She reported it to me, Riven said quietly. Yesterday. Which is why she's wearing it today. We're conducting our own investigation." The lie was delivered with such perfect confidence that I almost believed it myself. Corvin's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation. He'd expected confusion, fear, maybe even dismissal. He hadn't expected the king to claim control of the narrative so smoothly. "I see." Corvin sat back. "And has this investigation yielded results?" "It's ongoing." "Then perhaps purely for security purposes, the girl should be removed from sensitive meetings until it's resolved?" "Perhaps," Riven agreed. "Or perhaps whoever is playing games with my staff should consider that I don't leave my pieces undefended." The temperature in the room shifted again. This wasn't about me anymore, it was about power, about control, about who got to decide what happened within these walls. Lord Corvin had tried to use me as a lever to unbalance the king, to cast doubt on his judgment, to link him to a foreign conspiracy. And King Riven had just claimed me as his piece instead. "We'll continue monitoring the situation," Corvin said finally, "for everyone's safety." "Of course." Riven's smile was all teeth. "Now, the mineral rights? I believe Prince Kael was about to present his evidence." The session devolved into technical discussions after that: maps, surveys, treaty language. I served wine and tried not to exist again, but I could feel the attention on me like physical weight. Lady Sarah watched me with something like pity. Commander Cade watched me with suspicion. Lord Corvin watched me like a problem he was still calculating how to solve. And King Riven didn't watch me at all, which somehow felt the most dangerous. When the meeting finally ended 3 hours later, I thought I might escape, return to servants' quarters, hide in the familiar safety of kitchen steam and laundry soap. But as the nobles filed out, Lady Sarah touched my elbow. "Walk with me," she murmured. It wasn't a request. We moved through the palace corridors in silence, until we reached a small courtyard garden, far from the main halls. Only then did she speak. "You've been positioned," she said without preamble. "Do you understand what that means?" "That I'm being used. That you're being sacrificed." Her expression was grave. "The gift isn't about you, child. It's about creating a crisis the king must respond to. They want him to look unstable, irrational, or compromised. And you're the trigger." "I didn't ask for this." "No one does." She studied me with eyes that had seen decades of palace politics. "But you're in it now. So the question is, will you learn the game, or will you be consumed by it?" "The king said he'd protect me." "The king," Lady Sarah said carefully, "is one man managing an empire. His attention is finite. His protection is not absolute." She paused. "But I think you've already learned that, haven't you?" I thought of his warning. "Trust no one. Especially not me." "What do I do?" "You watch. You listen. You report anything unusual to Commander Cade or myself. Not the steward. Not other servants. No one else." She turned to leave, then stopped. "And Nyla, that hairpin isn't just positioning you. It's marking you. Whatever game is being played, you're the piece they think they can lose." She left me in the garden with those words echoing in my mind. That night, back in my quarters, I discovered my roommate Mira's bed was empty. Her trunk was gone. The small wooden bird she'd kept on the windowsill, the only personal item she owned, had vanished. When I asked the head housekeeper where she'd gone, the woman barely looked up from her ledger. "Transferred. Upper kitchens needed staff." But she liked it here. "Staff preferences aren't a priority, girl. Back to work." I stood in the empty room and felt the walls closing in. The gift hadn't just brought attention. It had started removing people around me. And I had the terrible feeling this was only the beginning. The arrests happened at dawn. I heard about it from the kitchen staff, who'd heard from the guards, who'd witnessed Lord Corvin being escorted from his chambers by 6 armed soldiers while he protested loudly about rights and procedures and royal overreach. They'd found the original maps in his coat, exactly where I'd said they'd be. They'd also found correspondence coded, but damning once deciphered, showing months of coordination with border lords who wanted to see the king's authority curtailed. Corvin had been building a coalition, using the Northern Treaty dispute as the lever to pry open doubt about Riven's competence. It all would have worked too, if not for a hairpin and a servant who'd learned to be curious instead of invisible. By midday, the palace was buzzing. Servants whispered in corners. Nobles gathered in tight clusters, their expressions worried. A senior council member arrested for treason? It hadn't happened in decades. I spent the morning doing normal tasks, changing linens, polishing silver, trying to reclaim some sense of routine. But everywhere I went, people stared, whispered. They knew I'd been involved somehow, though the details were vague. The girl who'd found something. The maid the king kept summoning. The Omega wearing northern silver. By afternoon, I was exhausted from the attention and retreated to the small servants' courtyard for a moment of peace. I wasn't alone long. They're saying you're a hero. Prince Kael's voice came from the archway. The servants, I mean. They're saying you exposed a conspiracy. I turned to find him leaning against the stone, his expression thoughtful. In daylight, without the formal trappings of the council chamber, he looked younger. Less like a prince, more like a man trying to navigate complicated waters. I'm not a hero, I said. I just paid attention. That's often what heroism is. He moved closer, then stopped at a respectful distance. I owe you an apology. For what? The hairpin. It came from my territory from a specific craftsman who only takes commissions from northern nobility. Someone was trying to make it look like I was conducting secret communications with palace staff. He shook his head. You got caught in political games that had nothing to do with you. Everything in this palace has to do with politics, I said. I'm learning that. Quickly, it seems. He smiled. The king is lucky to have someone so observant in his household. Something about the way he said it, warm, genuinely respectful, made me suddenly aware of how different it felt from Riven's intensity. Kael looked at me like a person. Not a problem, not a piece, not a puzzle. Just a person. Will you stay? I asked. Now that the documents prove your claim? For a few more days. The treaty needs to be formally ratified, terms finalized. He glanced toward the main palace. Your king is intense, but fair. I think we'll reach an agreement both sides can live with. He's not my king, I said automatically. Kael's smile widened. Isn't he? Before I could respond, a throat cleared behind me. King Riven stood in the courtyard entrance, still dressed in the formal coat he'd worn for the afternoon council session. His eyes moved from me to Kael, and something cold flickered across his expression. Prince Kael, I was told you were looking for me. I was, Kael agreed easily, but I got distracted thanking the woman who saved both our political careers. I hope that's forgivable. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Nyla, the king said, his voice carefully controlled. Commander Cade is looking for you. Something about inventory in the East Wing. It was a dismissal, clear, polite, and absolute. Your Majesty, I curtsied and moved toward the arch, careful not to brush either man as I passed. But I caught Kael's quiet words as I left. She's remarkable. You're fortunate she chose to help instead of... Careful, Prince. Riven's voice was soft. Dangerous. You're a guest in my palace. Remember that. I didn't hear Kael's response. I was already moving through the corridors, my heart pounding with something I couldn't name. The king had been... what? Territorial? Jealous? No, that was impossible. I was a servant. A useful one, maybe, but still. He was warning him off. I jumped. Lady Sarah had materialized beside me with the silent efficiency she seemed to specialize in. My lady? The king. Just now. Her eyes were knowing. He was making it clear that you're under his protection. That Kael shouldn't misunderstand the situation. There's nothing to misunderstand. You're not just anything anymore, child. She steered me into an empty sitting room and closed the door. You need to understand what's happening. What is happening? You've become visible. More than that, you've become important. The king has claimed you as someone under his personal attention. Whether he means it romantically or politically doesn't matter. What matters is that every noble in this palace now sees you as connected to him. My stomach dropped. I don't want to be connected to anyone. I just want to do my job. That option ended when you chose to investigate instead of hide. Her expression softened slightly. I'm not saying it's fair, but it's reality. And you need to navigate it carefully. How? By understanding that men like King Riven don't share well. Especially not things or people they've decided to protect. She moved toward the door, then paused. He cares what happens to you, Nyla. That's dangerous for both of you. Be careful how you handle it. She left me alone with those words echoing in my mind. He cares what happens to you. I thought about the way he'd looked at me in the archive, the warning in his voice when he'd told KL to be careful, the way he'd said stay close like it was an order and a plea combined. No, Lady Sarah was wrong. The king was just protective of his staff, strategic about his assets. It didn't mean, "You're thinking too hard." Commander Cade filled the doorway like a wall of muscle. "I can see smoke coming from your ears." "You were looking for me?" I asked, grateful for the distraction. "Something about inventory?" His expression turned sheepish. I wasn't actually looking for you. His Majesty needed an excuse to separate you and the Northern Prince." "Why?" Cade just looked at me. "Oh." Heat crept up my neck. He doesn't need to. I know. You weren't doing anything wrong, but appearances matter. And a Northern Prince speaking privately with a maid who's become central to a conspiracy investigation? He shook his head. Bad optics. So I'm just supposed to avoid Prince Kale? He's a guest here. He was being kind. I'm not saying you can't talk to him. I'm saying be aware that people are watching, interpreting, making assumptions. He softened slightly. You're not in the background anymore, Nyla. Every interaction means something now. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand to know when I'd lost control of my own life. I wanted to go back to being invisible, where at least I'd understood the rules. But I didn't do any of those things. Because a small, treacherous part of me didn't want to go back. I liked being seen, even if it was dangerous. Especially because it meant being seen by him. The knock came 3 nights later, well after midnight. I woke to the sound of knuckles against wood, soft, but insistent. My roommate's bed was still empty. They hadn't assigned anyone new after Mira's transfer. I was alone in the dark with my racing heart and the certain knowledge that midnight visitors meant nothing good. "Who is it?" I called, not moving toward the door. "Someone who wants to help you." Lord Corvin's voice. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything except open that door. But running where? Screaming to summon whom? The guards were floors away, and if I raised an alarm against a lord, even an arrested one without proof of threat, I opened the door a crack. Corvin stood in the dim corridor, dressed in traveling clothes, without his usual retinue of servants. He looked diminished somehow, older, but his eyes still held that calculating gleam. "You shouldn't be here," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're under house arrest. Confined to the palace, yes, but not to my chambers. I have rights, even as the accused." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "May I come in?" This conversation would be better held privately. "No." Smart girl. He didn't seem offended. "Then I'll be brief. You've made quite an impression on His Majesty. Risen from complete obscurity to someone he trusts, someone he protects. That's remarkable. If you're here to threaten me..." "Threaten? No. I'm here to offer you an opportunity." He leaned against the doorframe, casual but blocking my exit. "You're clever, observant, and currently positioned perfectly to influence the king's decisions. Those are valuable skills. I don't influence anything. I'm a servant. You're the servant he summons to private meetings, the one he asks to investigate conspiracies, the one he publicly defended in council." Corvin's smile widened. "Don't pretend you don't understand your own value." My mouth went dry. "What do you want?" "Information. Nothing dramatic, just small details. Who visits the king privately? What documents Lady Sarah requests? Which foreign dignitaries receive special attention?" He paused. "In exchange, I offer you a future." "I have a future." "Do you? You're an Omega servant in a palace full of ambitious alphas. Even with royal protection, you're one scandal away from being discarded. One false accusation. One moment of royal displeasure." He let that sink in. "But with my support, you could have real security, a position with a noble house, a stipend, maybe even a dowry substantial enough to attract a decent match." It was a good offer. Too good. The kind of future servants dreamed about but rarely achieved. Which made it a trap. And all I have to do is spy on the king. Such an ugly word. Think of it as staying informed, protecting yourself. He straightened. The king is young, impulsive, making enemies faster than allies. When he falls, and he will fall, you want to be on the winning side. And if I refuse? Corvin's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. Then you continue as you are. Walking a razor's edge, making enemies in high places. One mistake away from ruin. It wasn't a direct threat. He was too smart for that. But the implication was clear. Refuse him, and those mistakes would happen. I need to think about it, I said, stalling. Of course, but don't think too long. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Nyla? In case you're considering running to the king with this conversation, remember that I'm confined here pending investigation. My movements are monitored. If you claim I threatened you, I'll simply say you approached me, trying to sell information for money. Who do you think the council will believe? He left before I could respond. I closed the door and stood there shaking. He was right about one thing. It would be my word against his, a servant against a lord. Even with the king's protection, that was a dangerous game. But I had something Corvin didn't know about. I'd learned to be clever. The next morning, I requested an audience with Commander Cade through proper channels. No secret summons, no midnight meetings. Everything documented, formal, and witnessed. When he received me in his office, a sparse room that smelled of weapon oil and old leather, I told him everything. Every word of Corvin's offer, every implication, every threat wrapped in politeness. Cade's expression grew darker with each sentence. He came to your quarters, he repeated slowly. After midnight, alone. Yes, sir. That violates his house arrest terms already. He stood, pacing like a caged bear, but without witnesses. I kept the door open, I interrupted. The corridor guard had line of sight the entire time. He didn't hear our conversation, but he can confirm Corvin was there. Cade stopped, stared at me. You thought ahead. I'm learning. The king needs to hear this. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Actually, first, did you accept Corvin's offer? No, sir. Did you refuse? I stalled. Said I needed time to think. His smile was grim. Even better. That means he thinks he might still have a chance. 30 minutes later, I was in the war room again with the same core group. Riven, Cade, Lady Sarah, and now Prince Kael, who was apparently being included in security decisions given his stake in the treaty outcome. I repeated the story. Every detail, every word I could remember. The king listened in absolute silence, his expression carved from granite. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, he threatened you. He implied consequences, I corrected carefully. He didn't make specific threats. He came to your quarters after midnight and suggested you'd be ruined if you didn't cooperate. That's a threat. His voice was deadly quiet. That's intimidation. It's also treason, Lady Sarah added, attempting to place a spy in the king's inner circle. We can't prove he was trying to recruit a spy, Kael pointed out. He'll claim he was offering legitimate employment. Then we make him prove it, Riven said coldly. Nyla, could you pretend to accept his offer? My stomach dropped. Your Majesty? Meet with him again. Tell him you've considered his proposal and you're interested. Get him to be explicit about what he wants. Names, documents, specific information. The king's eyes met mine. If we're going to bury him, we need him to say the quiet part loud. That puts her at risk. Cade protested. Everything about this situation puts her at risk, Riven snapped. Then softer. But I won't order it. This is her choice. They all looked at me. I thought about Mira, disappeared to another posting. About the hairpin, designed to make me visible. About Corvin's smile when he'd promised me a future, the same smile he'd probably given to everyone he'd manipulated over his long career. I thought about the king's warning. Trust no one, especially not me. But I did trust him. Despite every instinct that said it was foolish, I did. I'll do it, I said, but I want insurance. What kind? Riven asked. I want Corvin to think I'm genuinely tempted, which means I need something to bargain with information that seems valuable but won't actually compromise anything important. I looked at Lady Sarah. Can you feed me false intelligence? Things that sound legitimate but won't help his cause? She smiled slowly. I can do better than that. I can feed you intelligence that will lead him into more mistakes. And I want it on record, I continued, that I'm doing this under direct orders. So if it goes wrong, it's not my word against his. It's documented strategy. Commander Cade nodded approvingly. Smart. One more thing. I looked at the king. When this is over, when Corvin is dealt with, I want to go back to normal duties. No more investigations. No more politics. Just regular work. Something flickered in Riven's expression. Disappointment? Or maybe understanding. If that's what you want, he said quietly. It is. It was a lie, and I think we both knew it. But it was a lie I needed to tell. If only to convince myself I still had control over my own fate. Then we have a plan, Lady Sarah said. Nyla approaches Corvin tomorrow. Acts interested but cautious. Draws out specific instructions. We document everything and build an airtight case. And if he gets suspicious? Kale asked. Then she walks away, Riven said firmly. No heroics. No unnecessary risks. At the first sign of danger, she leaves. His eyes found mine again, and I saw something in them that made my breath catch. Fear. Actual, genuine fear. Not for himself. For me. I'll be careful, Your Majesty, I promised. You'd better be, he said quietly. Because if he hurts you, there won't be a trial. There'll just be a corpse. The casual way he said it, the absolute certainty should have terrified me. Instead, I felt safer than I had in days. The meeting with Corvin was scheduled for the next evening, in one of the palace's formal gardens where conversations could happen privately, while still being technically public. I spent the day rehearsing with Lady Sarah, learning the false intelligence we'd prepared, minor troop movements that were actually routine exercises, trade negotiations that were already public knowledge but presented as secrets, the news that the king was considering new taxation policies that would alienate the merchant class. Nothing true, nothing damaging, but all of it plausible enough to sound valuable. Remember, Lady Sarah coached, you're nervous, but tempted. You believe this is your chance at a better life. You're not a trained spy, you're a servant, making a desperate choice. That's not far from the truth, I muttered. Good, use that. By the time evening came, I was as ready as I'd ever be. I'd changed into my best dress, still servant grade but clean and well maintained, and removed the silver hairpin. Tonight I needed to look like someone who could be bought, not someone under royal protection. Commander Cade walked me to the garden entrance. We'll be listening, he reminded me quietly, tapping the small device hidden in my dress collar. Anything seems wrong, you say the word inventory, and we come running. Understood. And Nyla? He looked uncomfortable. Sir? The king is invested in your safety, more than is probably wise. He cleared his throat. Don't take unnecessary risks. For his sake as much as yours. Before I could process that, he was gone, melting back into the shadows. The garden was beautiful in the twilight, climbing roses and night-blooming jasmine filling the air with scent. Lord Corvin waited on a stone bench near the fountain, looking for all the world like a nobleman enjoying the evening air. Nyla, he greeted warmly as I approached. I'm pleased you decided to meet. Does this mean you've considered my offer? I have, my lord. I sat carefully, keeping distance between us. And I need to know more. About what you'd want from me. Specifically. His smile widened. Direct. I like that. Very well. He shifted to face me fully. The king is planning changes that will hurt this kingdom. New taxes to fund northern appeasement. Military reductions that will leave us vulnerable. He's being advised by bleeding hearts who think diplomacy solves everything. And you want me to tell you what he's planning? Before it's public? Exactly. Early warning gives us time to build opposition, to protect the kingdom's interests. He made it sound noble. Patriotic, even. For instance, I've heard rumors about taxation proposals. What can you tell me about those? This was it. The moment to feed him the false intelligence. He's considering a graduated trade tax, I said, letting nervousness creep into my voice. Higher rates for luxury goods. Lady Sarah suggested it would generate revenue without hurting common merchants. Corvin's eyes gleamed. When will this be proposed? Next council session, I think. Maybe the one after. Good, that's good. He leaned back, satisfied. You see? This is exactly the kind of information that helps us prepare proper counter-arguments. Nothing sinister about it. And the troop movements? I asked. I've seen dispatches about the eastern border. Tell me. I fed him the false information about military exercises, watching as he absorbed each detail with barely concealed hunger. He was so focused on what I was saying that he didn't notice how carefully I was phrasing things, how I was getting him to confirm exactly what he wanted and why. This is excellent work, he said finally. You have a real talent for observation. What happens to me? I asked. After, when you have enough information. I told you a position, security, a future. He pulled a leather purse from his coat. And this as a down payment, 50 gold marks, enough to keep you comfortable for a year. I stared at the purse. 50 gold marks was more money than I'd see in 5 years of service. Take it, Corvin urged. Consider it a gesture of good faith. This was the trap, the moment where I either accepted and became complicit, or refused and revealed I'd been playing him. I reached for the purse, and a hand closed around my wrist. King Riven stepped from the shadows behind the bench, his grip gentle but immovable. Commander Cade emerged from the opposite direction, flanked by 2 guards. Lady Sarah appeared near the garden gate, blocking the exit. We'd sprung our own trap. Corvin's face went white. Your Majesty, this is attempted bribery of royal staff? Riven said coldly. Conspiracy to obtain state secrets, and solicitation of espionage. His eyes never left Corvin. All documented, all witnessed, all treason. She approached me. Corvin sputtered, rising. The girl is trying to sell information. I was gathering evidence. Funny, Cade rumbled. Because we've been listening to the entire conversation. Want to hear the recording? Corvin's mouth opened, closed. He looked at me with sudden, dawning horror. You, he breathed. You little... Careful. Riven's voice dropped to something dangerous. Very careful how you finish that sentence. His hand was still around my wrist, not restraining, protecting. His thumb moved once against my pulse point, a gesture so small and intimate that it sent heat through my veins. Take him, Cade ordered the guards. Full security detention. No visitors without royal approval. As they hauled Corvin away, the Lord protesting, threatening, promising consequences, Riven finally released my wrist. You did well, he said quietly. I was terrified. I know, I could hear it. His jaw tightened. When he offered you that purse, when he tried to make you complicit, I wasn't going to take it. Not really. I know that too. He looked at me then. Really looked. And something in his expression made the garden feel suddenly too small, too intimate. We should return inside. Debrief with the council. But he didn't move, neither did I. Lady Sarah cleared her throat from across the garden. I'll begin preparing the formal charges. Commander, you'll want to secure Corvin's chambers before he has time to destroy evidence. Right, yes. Cade shot a meaningful glance at the king. Your Majesty? I'll be along shortly. They left. And suddenly I was alone in the twilight garden with the Alpha King in air that felt too thick to breathe. Nyla, he started. You were afraid, I said before I could stop myself. Earlier, when we were planning this, you were afraid something would happen to me. He went very still. I was concerned for your safety, yes. Not just concerned, afraid. I took a step closer. Why? Because you're under my protection. That's not why. Because you're valuable too. That's not why either. Silence stretched between us. The fountain burbled. Night jasmine perfumed the air. Somewhere in the distance, palace bells rang the hour. No, he said finally, his voice rough. That's not why. My heart hammered. Then why? He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, close enough that his scent, pine and steel, and something uniquely him surrounded me. Because when I saw that hairpin, he said quietly. When I realized someone thought they could reach you, claim your attention, mark you with their gift, something in me broke. Your Majesty, because the thought of losing you made me reckless. His hand lifted, not quite touching my face but hovering near enough that I felt the heat. Because I've spent 6 years controlling every emotion, managing every response, being the perfect calculated king. And then a servant with a silver hairpin in her hair looks at me like I'm just a man. And suddenly I can't remember why control mattered. Oh. I dragged you into this, he continued, words tumbling out like a confession he'd been holding back too long. Made you visible when you were safer in shadow. Put you in danger for political advantage. And the part that terrifies me isn't that I did it, it's that I don't regret it. Because every moment you're close, every time you choose to stay instead of run, every look you give me that says, you see the man underneath the crown. He stopped, swallowed hard. I'm not good at this, he admitted. At being honest about what I feel. At letting anyone close enough to matter. You're doing fine, I whispered. I want. He stopped again. No, I need to say this properly. You deserve proper. He stepped back, creating distance that felt like loss. When he spoke again, his voice was formal, controlled the king instead of the man. Nyla Thorne, you have served this kingdom with courage and intelligence. You've risked yourself for truth, for justice, for people who will never know your name. You've proven yourself worthy of far more than servants' quarters and cleaning rosters. Your Majesty, let me finish. His eyes held mine. I cannot offer you what you deserve. I cannot court you properly, marry you publicly, give you the life you should have. The politics alone would destroy us both. But, he faltered, the perfect control cracked. But I can offer you the truth, which is that when I look at you, I don't see a servant. I see the bravest person I've ever met. I see someone who chose to matter instead of hide. I see. His voice dropped to barely audible. I see the only person in this entire palace who looks at me and sees me. Tears burned behind my eyes. I'm just a maid. No. He shook his head. You're not. You never were. And I think part of you has always known it. He was right. Some part of me had always known I was meant for more than invisibility. That's why I'd kept the hairpin. Why I'd investigated instead of ignored. Why I'd said yes every time he asked me to be brave. What happens now? I asked. Now, he took a breath. Now I give you a choice. You can return to normal duties as you requested. I'll ensure you're protected, provided for, left alone to live whatever life you choose. Or you stay, in my inner circle, not as a servant, as an advisor. Lady Sira has been requesting an assistant, someone with your observational skills. You'd have status, protection, a real position. He paused. And you'd be near me. Which is selfish on my part, but there it is. As an advisor, I repeated carefully. Not as whatever you choose, he interrupted. If you want distance, I'll respect it. If you want friendship, I'll cherish it. And if you want... He stopped. If you want more, then I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of it. Politics and propriety be damned. The smart choice was obvious. Take the safe option. Return to obscurity. Live a quiet life where my biggest concern was whether the silver was polished properly. The smart choice would protect my heart. But when had I ever chosen smart over brave? I'll stay, I said. Not because you're the king, because you see me, and I swallowed hard. I see you too. Something transformed in his expression, relief and joy and fear all tangled together. Nyla, but I have one condition. He smiled. Name it. Don't promise me safety. Don't promise easy. Just promise me truth. Always, even when it's hard. Then here's one more truth, he said quietly. I've been falling for you since the moment you stood in my study and refused to look away, and I'm terrified it's going to destroy us both. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe we'll be the ones doing the destroying, to anyone who tries to use us as pieces in their games. He laughed a real laugh, surprised and genuine. You really are remarkable. I know, I smiled. I learned it from a king who forgot how to be anything but remarkable. Nyla, Your Majesty. Riven, he corrected. When we're alone, just Riven. Then Riven. I tested the name. Liked the way it felt. We should probably return to that debriefing before Commander Cade sends a search party. Probably. But he didn't move. Neither did I. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. He raised his hand again, and this time his fingers brushed my cheek barely a touch, but it sent electricity through every nerve. Thank you, he said softly. For choosing to stay. For choosing me. Thank you, I replied, for giving me the choice. We returned to the palace together. Not touching but walking close enough that our shoulders brushed. Not king and servant, not alpha and omega. Just two people who'd decided that maybe, just maybe, brave was better than safe. And the future could sort itself out. Lord Corvin's trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversation, the false documents, the correspondence with border lords, testimony from servants he'd intimidated over the years. Even his own defense counsel looked uncomfortable by the second day. The council voted unanimously for conviction. Corvin was stripped of his title, his lands forfeit to the crown, and sentenced to permanent exile in the far territories close enough to monitor, far enough to be powerless. Lord Tremaine, who'd cooperated fully once arrested, received a lighter sentence, house arrest and removal from all political positions. Justice, Lady Sarah observed as we watched the sentences being carried out, is sometimes swift, when the evidence is clear. I stood beside her in the observer's gallery, no longer in a servant's uniform but in the simpler clothes of a council assistant. The change still felt strange, like wearing someone else's skin. "Do you think he'll try again?" I asked. "Find some way to cause trouble from exile?" "Probably. Men like Corvin don't learn." She smiled slightly. "But he'll find we're ready this time. We learned from his mistakes too." Below, Corvin was escorted from the chamber. As he passed beneath our gallery, he looked up. Our eyes met. He didn't look angry anymore, just old, diminished. He'd spent decades building power, and I'd helped dismantle it in less than a month. "Does it feel good?" Lady Sarah asked quietly. "Winning?" "It feels necessary," I said. "Not good, just necessary." "That's wisdom." She turned from the railing. "Come, we have work to do. The Northern Treaty needs final review before the ratification ceremony." Work, real work. Not scrubbing floors or polishing silver, but reading documents, attending meetings, offering opinions that people actually listen to. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt complicated. That evening, I found Prince Kale in one of the smaller libraries, reviewing a map of the new treaty boundaries. "They're giving us more than I expected," he said without looking up. "Fair borders, mineral rights, and a trade agreement that benefits both sides. Your king drives a hard bargain, but he's honorable about it." "He's not my king," I said automatically. This time, Kale didn't smile. "Isn't he, though? I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. How you look at him." Heat crept up my neck. I'm not judging." He set down the map. "I'm actually relieved. When I first arrived and saw that hairpin, saw how he reacted, I thought there might be complications. But seeing you both together..." He shrugged. "It makes sense." "What makes sense?" "Why he's so fierce about protecting his people. Why he fights so hard for what's right." Kale's expression was thoughtful. "He has something worth protecting. Someone who reminds him why it matters. If you say, just a servant one more time, I'm going to request diplomatic immunity so I can shake you." He interrupted. "You helped expose a conspiracy, negotiated a peace treaty, and saved both our kingdoms from a conflict neither could afford. Own it." I laughed despite myself. "You sound like Lady Sarah." "She's a wise woman." He rolled up the map carefully. "I leave tomorrow, back to the Frost Territories. But I wanted to thank you, properly, for everything." "You don't need to." "I do. Because without you, this treaty wouldn't exist. My grandfather would have died thinking his alliance was betrayed, and 2 kingdoms would have stumbled into a war over a lie." He offered his hand. "So thank you, Nyla Thorne. The North remembers its debts." I shook his hand, formal and proper. "Will you come back?" I asked. "For trade negotiations or diplomatic visits?" "Probably. Though I suspect your king will make sure we're never alone in a garden again." His smile was wry. He really is quite possessive, in the best way. The formal ratification ceremony happened the next morning in the throne room, witnessed by the full council and visiting dignitaries. King Riven and Prince Kael signed the treaty documents with ceremonial pens, exchanged formal bows, and spoke words about friendship and prosperity that would be recorded in history books. I watched from the side, no longer background but not quite foreground either. A strange middle space I was still learning to navigate. When it was over, when Kale had departed with his retinue and the nobles had dispersed to celebrate, Riven found me in the now empty throne room. "You didn't have to stay," he said, climbing down from the dais. "The ceremony was the boring part. I wanted to see it finished, properly." He stopped in front of me, close but careful not to touch. We were still in public space, still being careful about appearances. "It's finished," he confirmed. "The treaty is ratified. Corvin is gone. The immediate crisis is resolved." He paused. "Which means you're free to make your choice." "What choice?" "The one I offered you in the garden. You could still return to normal duties. Step back from all of this." His expression was carefully neutral. "I would understand." Would he? Or would he be hurt, disappointed, left wondering if I'd only stayed because the danger made it exciting? "I already made my choice," I reminded him. "I chose to stay." In the moment, after adrenaline and confessions, and he gestured vaguely. "I want you to choose in the quiet too. When there's no conspiracy to solve, no villain to defeat. Just normal palace life." "Normal palace life," I repeated, "where I'm an advisor to Lady Sarah, attend council sessions, and see you every day?" "Yes." "And where we have to be careful about propriety and politics and what people think?" "Yes." "And where you're still the Alpha King and I'm still an Omega who used to scrub your floors?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. All of that. The complicated, messy, difficult reality of it. I stepped closer. We were alone in the throne room, as alone as we'd ever be in this public space. "Then here's my truth," I said quietly. "I don't want easy. I don't want simple. I want complicated and messy and difficult if it means being honest, being seen, being with someone who looks at me like I matter." "You do matter." "I know. You taught me that." I smiled. "So yes, Riven, in the quiet, in the boring, in the moments when nothing exciting is happening and we're just two people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space, I still choose to stay." Relief washed over his face. "You're certain?" "Completely." I paused. "Are you? Because having me around will complicate things. People will talk. The nobles will gossip. There will be political implications to every interaction we have." "Let them talk." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. "I've spent 6 years being the perfect political king. Maybe it's time I was just me." "And who is that?" "Someone who's learning," he admitted. "Someone who's trying to be worthy of the woman who chose to stay." The throne room's high windows caught the morning light, sending colored patterns across the marble floor. Somewhere in the palace, servants were preparing midday meals. Nobles were scheming. The world continued turning. But for just this moment, in the space between crisis and whatever came next, we had peace. "Come on," I said, tugging his hand gently. "Lady Sarah wants me to review the trade agreement clauses. Apparently I have opinions worth hearing now." "You always did," he replied. "We just weren't smart enough to ask." We walked from the throne room together, hand in hand where anyone could see. It wasn't proper. It wasn't politically wise. It would cause talk and speculation and probably a dozen new complications. But it was honest. And honest, we'd decided, was worth more than safe. 2 months later, I found a small package on my desk in the office I now shared with Lady Sarah. Simple brown paper, neat string. A card that read simply, "This one is from me." Inside was a hairpin, not silver this time, but copper chased with gold. Simple, beautiful, clearly expensive, but not ostentatiously so. The design was a sun rising over mountains. A new beginning. I was wearing it that evening when I joined the council session to present my analysis of border trade patterns, wearing it openly, proudly, with everyone knowing exactly who it came from. Lord Tremaine, serving his house arrest in attendance via proxy, sent a formal letter of protest about impropriety. The council voted it down unanimously. Progress, I thought, came in small victories. Later that night, in the quiet hour after the palace had settled, I found Riven in his study reviewing dispatches. "The hairpin suits you," he said without looking up. "The giver has good taste." "Does he?" He set aside his work, finally meeting my eyes. Some would say his judgment is questionable. Some would be wrong. I moved closer, leaning against his desk. "How questionable we talking? Slightly impractical, or historically catastrophic?" "Somewhere in between," His smile was small but real. How was the council session? Productive. They actually listened to my recommendations about the eastern trade routes. Of course they did. You're brilliant. I'm learning. I picked up one of his dispatch papers, scanning it idly. From people who believe I can be. He caught my hand, drawing my attention back to him. I never doubted it. You absolutely doubted it. When I first showed up in your study wearing that silver hairpin, you thought I was either naive or a spy. Fair, he admitted, but I was right about one thing. What's that? You were dangerous. His thumb traced circles on my wrist, just not in the way I expected. I laughed. Dangerous how? You made me want things I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. Peace, trust, someone to share the weight with. He pulled me closer, gentle but insistent. You. I wanted you. Still do. More every day. You have me, I said simply. The complicated, messy version. My favorite kind. We stayed like that, comfortable in the quiet. Outside, the palace settled into night. Guards changed shifts. Servants completed final tasks. The kingdom continued its endless cycle. But here, in this room, we had something rare. We had truth. We had choice. We had each other. Thank you, I said softly, for the hairpin, for seeing me, for being brave enough to be honest. Thank you, he replied, for staying, for choosing messy, for teaching a king that control isn't the same as strength. So what now? Now? He smiled. Now we figure it out together, one complicated day at a time. And we did. They said an Omega servant couldn't change a kingdom. They said an Alpha King couldn't be moved. They were wrong about both. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a palace full of schemes isn't a conspiracy or a weapon or a secret alliance. Sometimes it's just two people who decide that truth matters more than safety. And choose each other anyway. Big shout out to our amazing viewers from Texas, California, London, Toronto, Australia, and so many more places around the world. Your support means everything to Liana's SMoonShadowTale family. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload. We have more thrilling werewolf stories, fated mate tales, and supernatural romance coming your way.